I have been looking for someone who isn't me and hasn't got skin in the game, and someone who isn't Michael, who's very upset by it, to talk about the events last week at the Voyager Media Awards and earlier, and the work and the attitude towards covering Andrea Vance. You note that mainstream media are not into this. We're about the only people who are really into it. The whole question of editorial standard and how you work, this is spilled over into Parliament. Winston Peters, Brooke Van Velden uses the C word in quoting the column. Winston Peters says that's appealing or appalling because he doesn't like getting attention when New Zealand First isn't. And it's all on. And I was looking for an old school journo that wasn't me, who might tell us the way things were and the way they should be. And I came up with, and he agreed this morning when he rang me back, he agreed to come on today and have a chat about it. Karl du Fresne, former scribe. It was the Dominion, wasn't it, originally, Karl?
Oh, look, I've lost track of the number of different papers I've worked for. I was with the Dominion for a while, Evening Post. I was editor of the Dominion once in a past life.
Yeah.
But let's not dwell on that.
All right. But standards. They've always been so-called editorial standards, even though journalism isn't a job that requires you have a degree or belong to any association, Karl. In your day, would those standards have allowed the use, albeit with stars, of the C word?
No, absolutely not. Just unheard of. There were all sorts of controls and balances in place on newspapers that would have prevented somebody like that particular journalist from even expressing a personal opinion, still less expressing it in such extreme terms.
All right. What were the old school rules about opinion pieces, Karl?
Well, I suppose the first rule was that there was a clear delineation between factual reportage and opinion pieces. And opinion pieces actually were not all that frequent. Opinion, I mean, if you want to go right back in the day, opinion was largely confined to the editorial column, which was kind of officially the voice of the paper. Nominally, it was the voice of the editor, but in real
terms,
and to be
granted the ability to write a column was an absolute privilege, right? That was a rite of passage accorded only to those with the experience and, if you like, the mana to do it.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And in fact, if you want to go back, 3 or 4 decades, the use of bylines was very limited, and bylines, which is the name of the journalist, the journalist name on top of the column or the story or whatever, they were used very, very sparingly, and only journalists who had earned a particular kind of cachet as a commentator on politics or whatever was given a byline. And I think in a way that's where the rot started to set in.
Karl, this is so interesting. I can remember as a young reporter in my 25, 30, right? I started to get approached because I had high-profile jobs in television or radio to write columns.
Right.
And I can remember talking to my father and feeling very uncomfortable about it. And I used to fill in occasionally from some mates, some old Tuskers, like Barry Soper, who used to have regular columns. But I never wanted a column because I thought, even into my mid-30s, I simply did not know enough or have the expertise in writing to assume that mantle.
No, yeah, I understand that entirely.
And it was a really big thing. I didn't want to expose myself by saying, even in my mid-30s, I had reached the lofty heights where I could write a column. And I'll be honest, maybe there's some snobbery. Television every night, I do my 60 seconds and my piece to camera. It's different. It doesn't have the same cultural impact. So actually, and I hadn't thought about this, but what you're saying was, and I had to say, in our day, it was an absolute privilege, an aspirational goal to be allowed even to write a column. And more so to write it in your own name meant you were a doyen almost, didn't it?
Yes, that's right. And I mean, to return to what I was saying earlier, I think the problem started to arise back in probably the 1970s when journalists started to be given bylines on everything they wrote. And I think this kind of created a mindset where journalists sort of bigged themselves up a bit, and they got a slightly inflated impression of their own importance. And I mean, yeah, we see this carried to its extremes at occasions like the Voyager Media Awards, which are a massive display of ego and hubris, really, that mean a lot to the people who are actually there and who are winning honours on the night, but mean absolutely SFA to anybody else outside the media.
All right. Well, you've watched this, and you would say decline, and because you're an old tusker, you're allowed to say decline in standards. Everyone gets a byline. Everyone can express an opinion. In that context, did Andrea Vance a week or so back do anything particularly wrong? Did Tracy Watkins do anything particularly wrong in allowing her to publish that column with the C word in it?
Yeah, I think it was a gross error of judgment, and one that surprised me on the part of Tracy Watkins, because she's a journalist that I've worked with in the distant past, and I have a lot of respect for Tracy. I think she's a very capable journalist, and I think she made, as I say, a gross error of judgment, because it was such a totally gratuitous expression. It was just an attention-seeking device, pure and simple, on the part of Andrea Vance, and I can only think that she was kind of intoxicated with self-importance when she wrote that. I can't think of any other, because she didn't need to use that sort of terminology.
Well, I'd also say Andrea Vance breaks the odd decent story.
Yes, I agree. She's a capable journalist. She's done some good work, and I think she's, at her own cost, she's really seriously tarnished her reputation with this, and I think a lot of people are going to see her byline from now on and think, oh, Andrea Vance, do I want to read this?
Well, we asked her on to discuss this week, and I got a text from her on Sunday, Karl. It said, after the disgusting, not to mention defamatory things you and Laws have said about me in the last week, no effing chance. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because once you're swinging that sword of writing the opinion column, once you've entered the fray, I would say you have to accept that you're in the battle.
Yeah. Indeed.
And she doesn't. She thinks she should have a completely sort of sealed off place by which to shoot her shots. And this is in relation to another story about me that was completely made up on the same day as the C column. Which you probably didn't read. Yeah.
But I think when you make an extreme comment such as that, and it becomes a public issue to the extent where it's being debated in Parliament, I think you have a duty to front up and explain yourself and defend yourself.
Well, they've done that, they would say, through the pages of the newspaper. And she wrote a column defending herself on Sunday. Which I guess. Do you read the papers anymore, Karl?
No, I'm a practitioner of I'm a practitioner of what is now known as news avoidance. I haven't watched a TV news bulletin since I think late 2023. I used to habitually listen to Morning Report almost every day without fail. I abandoned that quite some time ago. Wow. I should add that I don't totally engage in news avoidance. I don't think you can cut yourself off from the world. So I do still keep up with the news online, but I've become very picky and choosy about
Does
what I read.
Does the platform ever pop up in your feeds or in your algorithm?
It pops up on. I'm sorry to say this, Sean, but it does pop up on the periphery. I couldn't say no more than that, and because
the world's a critic.
I find the whole problem with the media is it's become so polarized that the centre ground, what I regard as the centre ground where most good journalism used to reside, has basically been vaporized.